Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co host, Nathan Rittenhouse. In this episode, Cameron and I kind of have a disagreement, but we're not really sure if we have a disagreement, so you'll have to listen to this whole long rambling thing to figure out what it is that we're both trying to say and whether or not we're kind of just providing guardrails along a certain train of thought that I think you'll find a lot of value in balancing these ideas around as we go. Centered around Ross Douthat's book, Believe. Cameron's a little more sympathetic to the fullness of the argument. I see some cautionary tales and flags along the way, and the truth is probably right down the middle somewhere. Like, share, subscribe, continue to follow and engage with our content. If you want to have a better idea of what we're up to or support what we're doing, toltogether.com is our website, and you can find us on all the socials and the places where you find podcasts in general. Thank you.
I want to talk to you about religion as a good stepping stone toward Christianity, or what you and I consider to be the true faith. Our conversation partner is, I've practiced this, Ross Douthat. Now, we've mentioned Ross Douthat before, but for some reason, his name continues to just trip everybody up. He's a good sport about it. I've seen him in numerous interviews laughing about it. But
I mean,
yeah,
Ross is a hard name to. Ross is a hard one.
I know. Yeah, it's very unusual too. Gosh, I mean, I can't personally say I know any Rosses. We jest. But so Ross Douthat's new book. So if you don't know who he is, New York Times columnist, opinion writer, has been for I think at least 10 years. So a long time, conservative Catholic at that fine publication. So he finds himself in the crosshairs quite often, which has done its work of refining his way of speaking. He's quite ironic. He's good at he's good at talking with people who disagree with him. He's gotten very good at that over the years. But he has a new book that's just come out called Believe. And in that book, he is making a case for religion in broad terms as a good thing, and as a way to get you closer to the truth if you're an earnest seeker. So some of the ways this has been described by reviewers is that he is, just as C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity all those years ago, which began as a series of BBC radio lectures, making a case for kind of bare bones Christianity, Ross Douthat is doing something not dissimilar, but with religion this time, which is a testament to just how far our culture has moved away from Christianity entirely since Lewis wrote. So I'm sympathetic to his arguments. Now, one caveat, I'm a typical person these days. I've read several reviews and interactions with the book. I haven't read the book yet. I'm planning to read the book. But we ourselves are the ones who repeatedly make the case we have to do less better. There's an impossible influx of books and information. We can't possibly take it all in at once. So I'm actually not that apologetic that I haven't read the book yet. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But it's certainly climbed to the top of my kind of prioritized reading list. So I will be reading it soon. But with that in mind, let me get us started with just a few basic arguments that he makes in the book. And then I want to get Nathan, I want to get you to comment on this. But he says, first of all, that there are very few religious geniuses among us, in the sense that when it comes to the world of religion and spiritual questing, there are very few of us who are actual genuine self-starters. Very few. The modern figure who always comes to mind for me here, Nathan, is Simone Weil. I'm not sure that's entirely fair, but I don't think Simone Weil ever officially joined she was on the threshold of the Catholic Church, I think, for most of her adult life, her short adult life. She died quite young. And there's a book that she wrote, which is a series of letters between her and a Catholic priest, called Waiting for God. But she never actually crossed that threshold. But I would describe Simone Weil as a religious genius, in the sense that she was just a very unusually, not only intellectually gifted, but an unusually pietistic, devout kind of spiritual prodigy. There's no other way to put it. But all that to say, if you read about somebody like Simone Weil, the overwhelming conclusion will be there are very few human beings like this.
You
This is a
would
star
you
that
go
burned
so
very, very bright.
would you go
Yeah.
so far as to stick David Foster Wallace in there?
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I might. Gosh, I was not anticipating a question like that.
Turn the screws on you
Certainly,
here.
well, I would put, yeah, I mean, so I think David Foster Wallace was a kind of prodigy and a visionary. So in a sense, yes, he was certainly a spiritual seeker. So, yes, but again, the overwhelming takeaway with somebody like a David Foster Wallace, like a Simone Weil, is that they're very unusual. They're normal human beings. They woke up in the morning and put pants on just like the rest of us, but they also had an inward spiritual vision that would leave most of us in the dust. And the reasons for that are mysterious. I don't think that they were made of some sort of special stardust or pixie dust or anything like that, but there is something mysterious about them. But all that to say, they are unusual. And chances are, dear listener, that's not you. Chances are, spiritual seeker, that's not you. And Ross Douthat says, that's not me. And dear reader, that's probably not you. So I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying the best course of action, if you are on some sort of a spiritual quest in this age of uncertainty and you are earnestly seeking the truth, your best bet is actually to go with organized religion. Because now you're joining a team of people who know what they're doing and you have sort of instruction manuals, so to speak. He gives the analogy of, let's say you're interested in a certain sport, like field hockey or something like that. You're going to learn a lot more about the sport if you actually join a team and start playing with other players who are experienced. You'll learn a lot more doing that than you will if you just grab a hockey stick and start making it up as you go along, which is what many people are doing is as they dabble in different spiritual pursuits. That's what Tara Isabella Burton calls the religiously remixed mindset, and I still think that's an extremely helpful sociological concept. It's also just a very practical, hands-on concept. Hey, I'm going to dabble with some sage burning here, maybe I'll take my tarot deck with me here, but keep it at arm's length and kind of take a consumer approach to it. But if we're talking about somebody who's an earnest seeker, religion doesn't, I mean, just start somewhere is going to be your better bet. All sorts of hugely thought provoking and potentially problematic kind of features that go along with that. So, Nathan, I'm going to kick it over to you. When I first pitched this to you, I could hear your brow furrowing over the receiver.
Yeah.
And yes, you can
So
hear that.
yeah. No, it's Cameron has learned to do a lot of judging in my pauses, I think. Um I think you spent a little more time on the religious genius one before I
Oh, yeah.
fully unwind my response here. Can you
Mhm.
flesh out a little bit more of that just pick a religion and start kind of idea
Oh,
as it
yeah,
goes?
sure.
Yeah, so we can put the
Yes.
whole lump of clay on the table.
Well, and again, bear in mind I haven't read the book yet, but so from the sort of reportage that I've sifted through, I mean, so we're talking reviews and interactions with the book and also interviews with Ross Douthat himself. So I've got some intelligence here that on the matter. But basically, the the benefit of religion when it comes to some sort of spiritual quest is that it offers you a structured and ordered approach in your spiritual pursuit. So you have rules. I really like the word structure. You've got you sort of you've got a set of practices that will structure your behavior and bring a level of order to your spiritual quest, to your pursuit. And yes, this is not limited to Christianity at first. Remember, he's making a case here at first. Now, Ross Douthat is very openly, devoutly Roman Catholic, and he makes that case toward the end of the book. So he's not arguing necessarily that all paths lead to God. Although if you know anything about post Vatican II Catholicism, you'll know that there's more sympathy for that line of thinking among some Catholics than, say, among, evangelicals, for instance. But I don't think that's what he's saying, actually. I think here's what I think Ross Douthat is really saying, and then I'll kick it over to you, Nathan, with regard to religion in particular. He is arguing, along with Blaise Pascal, that spiritual indifference in the modern world is one of the greatest maladies that we face, and that it is a form of total moral insanity if you just take a few steps back to say, well, you know what? I'm not really worried about the afterlife. There are enough fun things for me to do here. I'm just really not going to waste my time with that when eternity hangs in the bounds. So if you're indifferent on that subject, something has gone woefully wrong. And there are many people in that category. So once you recognize that spiritual indifference is truly a very bizarre intellectual position to occupy, and you start moving into, no, I want to find the truth, then Ross Douthat is arguing that organized religion, or the different faiths or different traditions that are actually structured and have a real order to them, will enhance your quest by giving it more focus and more order. And he has faith that if you are an earnest seeker, you will end up following the living God.
Does he make the C.S. Lewis quote explicit? What's the idea of I forget what creature it is. Tell us that story. Is that a connection there, or that just something that
No, it's a
is a
connection.
parallel?
And so
Okay.
he draws in Lewis's the most controversial book in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is The Last Battle. And so he brings in the Calorman soldier who was formerly following Tosh, the false god. But this Calorman soldier, so the Calormans were the enemies. These were the villains. The Calorman soldier ends up, I mean, the spoiler alert, but this has been out for a long time, so, get over it. Is in Aslan's country at the end. And so Lewis is nothing if not consistent. So this is a thread running through all of Lewis's thought. He's elsewhere he said, there will be surprises in heaven. So here's the fictional counterpart to that observation. And so when some of the people there express surprise that this soldier is there, Aslan basically says he was earnestly seeking me. And he just essentially he was following me, but he had the name wrong. So there's of course a serious theological dispute about what Lewis is doing there, whether he's a universalist, but that's really not what Ross Douthat is interested in when he brings in that story. What he's interested in is earnest seekers who want to know the truth of all the ultimate questions: where we came from, why we're here, how we should live, and then ultimately where we're going. And that he believes that earnest seekers, basically seek and you shall find, will be rewarded and answered by the living God. And so he's taking that as a fictional example of that without wanting to wade into the theological dispute. I hope that makes sense.
Well, I'll have some thoughts, and then you can push back on my pushback, and then maybe that'll clarify
Sure.
what's
Sure,
actually
sure.
going on here. So on two categories, on the no geniuses, and then this idea of just kind of starting on a religion, and it's easier to change lanes once you get going, kind of thing. Um,
Mm,
I think we do want to be mindful that, and so this is me not having read the book and just reading a couple reviews, but not to the depth. I've probably read stuff in the other direction of Cameron on this. There does seem to me to be an interesting sense in which, on one hand, we're saying there are no spiritual geniuses, although if you are genuinely seeking, you'll get to the right place. And I think I do want to maintain a broader openness to saying you don't actually have to be a genius of any kind as a spiritual creature in order to commune with the living God.
mm,
So we don't want to put some kind of pedestal in place when we look back through the Bible and say, well, the Bible is a story of super special people who are religious geniuses, and that's why God could communicate with them and they could come to their understanding of belief. Um, I think the whole point of the Bible is that you had a bunch of not geniuses, clever people, sure, but it wasn't their. spiritual virality or their intellectual capacity that gave them the um, put them in a situation where they're more likely to hear from God than others. So I want to cast a pretty broad net of who can hear from and understand God, which it seems like Douthat is probably doing by the end and looping back around to it. So I what I hear him saying in there is there are no geniuses is more something that I would phrase in the idea that probably if you're this many millennia into human history and the structures of religion and you're doing something truly innovative, you have a religious belief or system that is unique to you. You should do that with
Peculiar.
extreme you
Yeah.
should do that with extreme caution. Um,
Yeah.
and and I think because the probability of you being right in the face of the rest of humanity is low,
Mhm.
and maybe that does articulate or point to some of his thing of saying, like, if you're living if you can inhabit a mindset in which you're not spiritually curious, you have to recognize that as an extreme minority position, humanly speaking,
Yeah.
and the humility that should come out of that should you should at least be bothered by the fact that you're operating in a novel territory,
Mhm.
globally speaking. So this
Originality doesn't look good here. Yeah.
originality doesn't look good. So I would say that maybe not understanding the totality of his genius statement, I would say originality doesn't look good, but I do believe that um, Jesus spent a lot of time seeking and pursuing in his physical earthly ministry of walking around in the middle of nowhere. And so there we don't want to and however you're listening to this language, we I don't know what the right direction he's going with this is, but the wrong way would be to set some sort of hierarchical structure within the human heart of who is capable of communing with a living God and who isn't. So I'll stick that one out there first, and maybe you want to polish
Yeah.
something on that before we move on, Cameron.
Well, I wanna say something that I think will fly in the face of a lot of our modern sensibilities. So and this is just so with regard to the spiritual prodigy thing, the reason he's saying that no I think the reason he's saying most of us don't fall in this into this category is that most of us don't naturally recognize the profundity of great expressions of religion or spirituality. So, a perfect case in point are the disciples when they're, during Jesus's earthly ministry. And this is for me, you hinted at this, Nathan. This is for me so encouraging that they just continually are are really slow on the uptake. They just don't get it. Even when I mean, if you think about the, John, sort of John 15 through 17, I mean, some of the most amazing kind of divine discourses, and they're not really understanding what's happening. They don't recognize that profundity. So for most of us, and they do in hindsight. I mean, I love those passages that basically there's a kind of road to Emmaus sort of dynamic for many of us in life where some great form of, something revelatory will happen with us, and we'll only understand it in hindsight, and then we'll see it more clearly. And in Scripture, of course, this is not some magical process. The Holy Spirit is revealing it in hindsight
Mhm,
to people. So that's absolutely true. But part of what that means, though, is that we need. Okay, this is going to fly in the face of again. I'll just say it. We need a rule book. Now I know a lot of evangelical Christians in particular will want to immediately say, "No, no, Christianity is a relationship, it's not a religion." I remember once when I worked at a grocery store when I was in college, a lady came through and somehow Christianity came up and she asked me, I was the cashier, I was checking her out. She asked me, "Is Christianity is that a religion?" And as I was on the cusp of answering, the gentleman who was behind her in line was ready. He had the lines rehearsed. It's not a religion, it's a relationship. And then kinda went from there. But that never sat right with me. I think I understood what he meant, but that's not entirely true. It's not just some deracinated relationship, just you and Jesus. There is an order and arrangement and structure to it, and for many of us, we we need that. I think about
mhm.
the example of the Fiddler on the Roof, where everything feels so uncertain in life and so terrifying, and so these these traditions, these rituals, they structure our behavior and give us a purchase. So Drew Johnson who's written extensively on the role of ritual in human life, and we are all ritual creatures. Don't think of this in religious terms. Think about how your morning routine, or think about brushing your teeth, and all. I mean, these are all part of your. You have certain rituals that structure your behavior. But when life altering events happen, ritual becomes really, really helpful. So one example that Drew Johnson gives is when there's a funeral. If you have most cultures have a structured grieving process of some kind. We're not so good on this in the West, by the way. But plenty of, I mean, think about Latin American countries or Jewish funerals or Middle Eastern funerals. There's a tight set of protocol that structures grieving. And we really do need that help because when somebody you love dies, if you don't have that in place, if you're just fiercely individualistic, you're probably going to say, okay, what do I do?
Mhm.
What do I do now? And so you need people to, well, now we're gonna do this part, and now we're gonna have this food, and we're gonna do this together, and we're
Well,
going to, yeah,
and maybe to his point, it is often the case that somebody who hasn't thought about any of this at all, suddenly somebody in their family dies, and they're like,
yeah,
I guess we should call a preacher to figure out what should happen here."
yes,
And
oh,
it's
absolutely, yep.
and so that is that point too, like, okay, what is the who is the person who knows how to handle this
How to
uncharted
handle
territory?
this?
Yeah.
How do you act? And so that's where I think religion as a helpful structure, as an order, and yes, as a set of rules, we're allergic to that phraseology, is
Okay.
incredibly helpful, and
All right.
we and
I'm
I
ready
think
now.
we need that. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Break.
I've given you
So
enough.
here we go. Okay.
Strapping in.
So think of it this way, that and whether this is Douthat's case or Lewis's case or whatever, this is just these types of things are in the atmosphere, spiritually and religiously speaking, certainly in the political culture and time in which we live. But let's think of it like this. So let's say, Cameron, that you get really interested in martial arts, or you have an inkling that you would be interested in pursuing some sort of martial arts. And then you say, okay, there's karate, there's taekwondo, there's judo, there's jujitsu. There's the whole, like, where do you get started on this? Like, how do you decide which one's best? Which is the one that's, right for me? Blah, 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 blah. And then uh, maybe you bump into somebody and they say, "Hey, I do jujitsu at this place. You're welcome to come along." And it's super close to you, and it's convenient for you to be there. Works out with your family schedule, and so that's where you start. There, but at the end of the day, it's a pursuit of the martial arts, and there are common threads in the physicality and the spiritual or philosophical elements of this that you're seeking and you're searching for and you're pursuing, and so you just pick a spot and you go from there. There's a little bit of this pursue a religion thing that sounds like that to me, in that probably the large scale tangible outcomes for the vast majority of people of whether or not you start with karate or judo is not that all encompassing to the ins and outs and all the components and features of your life. And so I don't think I think people are thinking of it like choosing a martial art, but that is not a good analogy or parallel to what's happening spiritually, because to piggyback on what you were saying about it's not a relationship, or it's not a religion, it's a relationship. It's kind of like saying my marriage isn't a covenant, it's a relationship. Well, first of all, they aren't mutually exclusive. And probably if you've been married for 20 years, I would imagine that every component of your life is saturated in, seeped in, influenced, or informed by that relationship that you have. And so it's I can't conceptualize what it would mean to say I'm married, but it's just a relationship, but it doesn't have anything to do with my finances, the way I spend my, money,
Yeah,
my entertainment, whether or not we have like it's so intertwined and it's a unitary whole. And in fact, I know people struggle to define religion, and I recognize there's diversity there, but I really do like that religio, like the religamenting idea of
mhm.
the
I
ligaments are
love
the
that.
things that hold the bones together. And
Yeah,
so if you've ever looked at a skeleton of an animal that's decomposed, it's just a pile of
mhm,
bones. There's
yeah,
no necessary you if you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't be able to put the bones back together in a way that you'd be like, this makes sense. And so religion is the way in which we take all the fragments of our life and we see how they're ligamented and fit and structured together into a meaningful whole that then serves some purpose beyond just what it does to us individually. And so I think there's a pragmatic creep happening here of saying, look, religion stabilizes society. It puts the pieces together. Sure. Any martial art will teach you self-discipline and self-control. Sure. But is that actually the goal of what's happening here? And so the emphasis or the framework that I want us to think through, that you get a bit in the Lewis perspective and to maybe a lesser degree in the Ross Douthat vision, is that there's a sense in which if you are pursuing any religion, the difference between um your religious of just starting anywhere and becoming a Christian is that Christianity is a matter of degree, not a different it's a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. So you're saying I'm growing in this direction, and if I get far enough along this journey, I will end up as a Christian. So that's saying that the true faith revealed to the saints, in the or we can put it back like in Jesus, is that the logical progression of any pursuit of the not of goodness and of purity and of the grandeur and the glory of God will ultimately end in a worship of the triune God. So that would be saying that Christianity is merely different in degree, where I think that actually if I struggle to read that in what Jesus himself actually said in his kind of exclusive claims, where it seems like he is actually saying, "No, there's a difference in kind here of religious expression." Now, that's maybe not exactly what Ross Douthat is saying, but I wanna put that on the table just so people listening to this aren't confused or don't or can see the distinction there at least of saying that for Nathan's perspective on this, all reference to Ross Douthat as a good writer, um, it does seem like there is a categorical difference in what it is that the religion focuses on, emphasizes in, and ultimately leads to and is oriented around, and what is the the outcome of it. So I think there is a way in which you could say that you have people who come into the church because my life is a wreck. I'm sick and tired of the chaos. I need something that stabilizes me. And I come into this and it provides a good platform for me. And then suddenly I recognize that I do believe these bigger things and I become a glorifier of God in a conscientious glorifier and worshiper of God in my actual life. I think you have the exact same thing that happens for a lot of people, whether they're becoming Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim, what like that the
Yeah.
stabilizing part of religion is there and works, whether or not you choose your local cult might be actually good for your relationships. I don't know, but let's help me
Yeah, okay,
articulate
let me
here
help you
the
there.
difference.
I don't think so. I think your concern is totally legitimate. I don't think Ross Douthat is necessarily saying there's merely a difference in degree rather than kind. The picture I would use is more stepping stones. So here's what he would say. The person who becomes a Mormon is spiritually better off than a
Wait.
person who is
So
post-Christian.
can we make a distinction here? Help me because this might help a lot.
Sure.
He's making. I mean, the title of the book is Believe, so I'm guessing that he is making the claim that any step from a pure atheistic, naturalistic, no spiritual interest into a spiritual
100%.
interest is the shift that needs to happen.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
any religion that kind of helps you jar yourself out of your nihilism, basically, and your
Yes.
materialism is a
Yes.
step in the right direction, even if
Yes.
that isn't the final destination.
Precisely. Precisely. So he would say that, yes, and he does say that, but also and his view, I mean, the notion that again, it's really seek and ye shall find. It's not that all paths lead to God. I don't think that's what he's saying. Although I think his this approach, that's a liability of this approach. You're
Mhm.
certainly open to that charge. I think people who are concerned for I mean, you could people would be concerned with, possible syncretism, universalism, or, some version of all paths lead to God. I'm not I don't think that's what he's saying actually. But he is saying that you can move by degrees closer to the truth, but and also that if you are truly an earnest seeker and devout in that search, then the living God will honor that.
So wait, wait.
Yeah.
This is. I think this. Here's the rub. Is
Mhm.
the question is what is it that you're seeking? Because if you're just seeking community and stability,
But that could be no, I
any real
completely agree.
any really
Yeah, so
if you're seeking, I want to know the
the
truth,
truth,
then
I wanna know
suddenly you have a
salvation.
lot
Yeah.
of New Testament language that points to. God
Sure.
ordained the times, the places that we would live, that we would reach out to him and find him, though he's not far from every one of us. Draw near to God, and
Correct.
he'll draw near to you. I mean,
That's it.
well, bam.
But now bear in mind the backdrop, and he does talk about this a lot of what he's writing against is the age of spiritual uncertainty and the age of numerous options. So think about the image Lewis used in Mere Christianity in the preface. Remember, this is the hallway, and he says, I'm describing what can be when it comes to Christianity. Think of this as a hallway, but you want to find your way into a specific room where there's a fireplace and furnishings and chairs. So a tradition, right? And Lewis himself was Church of England, or maybe you end up in the room that is, or rather the massive hall that is Catholicism, perhaps. But so here, if we want to take a similar image or get that kind of idea for Douthat's book, it would probably be this is way less elegant, but a cafeteria with tons and tons of different options in it. But eventually, you want to make your way out of that cafeteria into something that's more like a real banquet hall. I don't know. It's not a
Yeah,
perfect picture,
I
but
mean, so it's that, but I would say the issue that I see most often is that people just stay in the cafeteria, or most people just
well,
stay in the
that's
hallway.
the temptation. But again,
So I think that's the
yes,
just
that's the
let's put a
temptation.
pin in that as we go by.
Well, that's the temptation, but again, he called it believe. Now, people start for all sorts of different reasons. I became a Christian when I was 5 years old because I loved my mom and dad. And for many people in the West, of course, today, as fiercely individualistic as we are and how much stock we put in personal choice, a lot of people are going to see that as invalidating my faith. Now, I grew into my faith by God's grace. But I also can look back on that and say, staring back down the corridors of time, I inhabited what sociologists would call a good plausibility structure. I had surrounded by people who were highly credible. They lived out what they said they believed. And so it wasn't, in other words, a complete decision in the dark. But still it was a starting point, and I grew into my faith. So maybe somebody starts by, I just been away from church for a long time. I don't necessarily believe any of this stuff's true, but gosh, my kids need to get plugged in and we can't meet anybody. We're so lonely these days. So let's join this church. There's a good community there. I'm fine with that. That's a start.
Mhm.
I've known people who did that and they're growing into their faith as we speak. Some people it might even be the civilizational piece.
How many
You know,
people do you know that did that with Islam, though?
Sure. No, I think a lot of I think innumerable people have done that with Islam. I think innumerable people, tons of people have done that with Mormonism as well. Absolutely. So, yes, in the end, if you want to grow into if you're in Christianity, you want to grow into your faith. If you're in another faith, you want to grow out of that faith and into Christianity. It's a messy process, but again, let's bring back in if you come to a place where you're earnestly seeking the truth, even though you had pragmatic reasons that you began with, if you come to a place where you're earnestly seeking the truth, then you're in a good place. Now you're off the path of nihilism and despair, and now you're moving in the right direction, even if it takes you through Wiccanism, even if this is Paul Kingsnorth. He's another example that's given sometimes, although Paul Kingsnorth, of course, has huge problems with civilizational yeah, arguments for Christianity. I still think that can be a starting place for a lot of people. I think it was certainly a starting place for Ion
Okay,
Hersey
so
Ali.
here's the thing, Cameron, that
Yeah.
let's use a parallel, let's use a thought experiment in a different theological category. I think here's what I see happening. Get into a conversation with somebody about baptism, and immediately they're going to want to know, what do you do with a thief on the cross? Jesus said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." Was the thief baptized? What's the role of baptism? Blah, 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 blah. Okay,
Yep.
not the clear teaching of the entire New Testament is that you should be baptized if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
I think here's how I look at these things. I want to be very clear on the things that Scripture is very clear on, and build my theology off of what the Bible clearly teaches, and then be thrilled to let God handle the exceptions. So I do not
That-
build a theology of baptism off of the thief on the cross. I build a theology of baptism off of the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of John the Baptist, the teaching of every single disciple and all the apostles and everybody after that. I build my theology off of that. And then what God does with the thief on the cross, and Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." I sit back, thumbs up, praise the Lord. I'm glad God can figure that out. My fear is in that something with a Ross Douthat type believey kind of thing here is that he's making a very, very nuanced argument that most people will miss the nuanced element of the argument and will end up building a theology based off of the exceptions of what God can do, not off of the primary way in which God wants to directly reveal himself to us without us going through the baggage of worshiping false idols or being trapped in cults or even pursuing things that are demonic that are the exact opposite of what it is that he desires in us recognizing his glory and doing things for our neighbor's good. So I'm kind of on this like, yeah, can God use this as a framework for to bring somebody into the fold? Yes. Do I want to act like that is what God desires to do? Nah, not yet. So I see this as a manifestation of God's grace in the exceptions, not the desire of his will and the way in which you would be under normals. I don't know what normal
Well, I don't
circumstances
think
are, but
yeah,
I was
I don't think
saying
he's well, I don't think he's arguing this is gonna be normative for everybody. I think he's trying to make a basic case for religion as an adequate or a good starting place for the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. And he's but I mean, not for I mean, and so it's in that sense he's writing. Also, bear in mind who he's writing to. He's writing to
I think that's a
jaded.
big deal. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
his
he's writing
writing
to
is
jaded. Yeah, I mean, his jaded post-Christian. Now, granted, this book is Zondervan, but he's Ross Douthat, who writes for the New York Times. A lot, I would say, a significant segment of his audience are probably non-Catholics, and many of them non-religious in some sense. So I think he's making the case for religion as the kind of a good stepping stone. I mean, going back to the brilliant picture you used of the, animal, a decomposed animal with just bones and the skeletal structure, you can't make sense of it anymore. I think if you had an anthropologist from Mars come down to Earth and study the spiritual habits of a lot of people here in North America, they would just see a whole bunch of really scattered bones. And they wouldn't be able to make sense of it because there's no real shape to it. It's just a bunch of in fact, they would probably have to conclude, "Okay, this is basically just a different form of consumerism. They're
mhm.
shopping here."
Okay.
Whereas if you found somebody yeah, right.
So this is so let me throw this in here. Is that okay? We lived in the period where everybody was worried about like, oh, the spiritually but not religious, right? So this is the everybody's in the hallway, everybody's in the cafeteria. We're throwing out this ambiguous like, oh yeah, we're like we believe there's something bigger in ourselves, but we can't say what it is. It doesn't really dictate our lives or anything that we do. We just like the feels or whatever. And so the proliferation of chaotic and crazy stuff that comes out of that is mostly sad and then secondarily hilarious. So like
Yeah.
there's a fine line there. And so that's the spiritual but not religious. I think what I'm hypersensitive to right now at this phase is the inverse of that, of the people who are religious but not spiritual. And
Mhm.
it seems like I mean, Jesus was concerned about that in his time, so this there's nothing new under the sun, but there is a moment in which we're like, "Well, just try it." Like, just try a religion and it'll structure your life, and then, um, maybe the spiritual uh, part will grow out of it. And I sure hope that's true for the person who walks into a church for pragmatic reasons or whatever we want to say. And here's the other thing, Cameron. A lot of the stuff that we think we're doing pragmatically is the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives and we don't know it. So,
Sure. Yep.
can God use our craving for stability and pragmatism? Yeah, I think we were built that way.
Mhm.
But here's what I'm saying is that the religious structure, because it is a religion and not just a relationship, that the religious structure that you step into will massively influence the way in which you spiritually grow or don't. And that's not true the difference between Christianity and Mormonism. That's true between differences in churches even. And so
Yeah.
the tradition and the religious structures and patterns do more to shape our posture and our orientation toward what is even spiritually possible or the way in which we engage with questions or even allowed to ask questions matters a lot. So,
And the key
here
question there is true is then one of truth. Does this actually
right.
match the world
Yeah.
as we see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I maybe where we're coming down at the end of this episode, Cameron, is to say for the audience in which this book is intended, the totally spiritually jaded, not hungry and thirsting for righteousness uh, category, that whatever. I mean, the Lord.
but are interested
But
in
yeah, so
what
maybe
the answer is or what
this is a push.
salvation is or what the truth is. Yeah,
Yeah, so maybe the any kind of religious interaction is going to be a helpful. Huh, there probably is something else here. I think down to psychedelics fit into this category. I think of the things that start
absolutely. Yep.
opening people's awareness that
Perceptions.
maybe
Yeah.
they don't have a tight lid on all of knowledgeology, and that science, as we know it now, doesn't account for all reality. That all of these things are good to push us out of our um,
Comfort zones and yeah,
comfort zones. But for
complacency. Yeah.
the Christian and the we also want to be very clear that that is not the desired avenue for somebody to go worship in a mosque for 15 years before they meet Jesus. Now, if that's what God has to take them through before they get there, fine. But let's recognize that Jesus's claims are different in kind, not just in degree of what it means to appropriately and properly worship. And I think you're saying let's look at the context to which Ross is writing. Sure, let's
Mm.
also look at the context which he's writing from, which Catholicism does have a rich history of deep syncretism, of kind of eclectically picking up pieces of the culture as it goes along, of the other religions and nations that it interacts with. And like, hey, here are some Muslims that have 99 beads on a string for the 99 names of Allah. Hey, that worked great as a rose. We can use that as Catholic Church. And now we have the Rosary. And so there is a way in which the Catholic Church is kind of this large snowball that, as it rolls along, picks up a lot of snow for sure, but also a lot of other debris with it as it accumulates mass along the way. And so Ross is writing from a context of a theology that is historically more geared toward um, an openness in these. I don't know how to phrase that exactly, um, but it's there, and that's a real part of who he is too.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in the end, a huge piece of this conversation is that you are more in a position of greater spiritual health if you are moving beyond your own individualistic pursuits, your own personal preferences, to seeing something more at work in the
So,
world at large
but this is where I'm not quite
and
sure though.
pursuing the truth of that.
Well, so this is the remaining question, and we're not gonna get it sorted out here. But are you better off because there I mean, so much of the world isn't the category that Ross is writing to that, like, I
Most of
mean,
the world's not. No, yeah.
yeah, so I'm thinking, like, when my dad was born down in the jungle in Ecuador, grandparents were working out there, and they were grieved by the amount of food that people put out in bowls along the rivers at night
Yeah.
to keep the demons happy.
And people were starving
And
probably,
people are start yeah, and so right,
malnourished. Yeah.
so you're looking at
Yep.
this, um, and for me to sit back and say, "Hey," or somebody listening to say, "You know what? My agnostic neighbor who, um, doesn't really have deep beliefs one way or the other is just kinda sitting there. They're not but they're also not, like, sacrificing or starving their children to a false god." It's hard to say that nothing is worse than
Well,
evil.
no, but we have to talk about the specifics of the book again. We're not in the jungles of Ecuador. And so, many places, there is no doubt whatsoever in anybody's mind that the spiritual realm exists and that there are powerful forces there that need to be appeased. And many people are in bondage to that. Here in the West, though, we're talking about a backdrop of affluence and comfort and convenience. And in that context, I think there's a case to be made for what Ross Douthat is talking about here.
So I do too, but let's just be clear to the people listening that is the audience that he's addressing, because if you extrapolate this out of that audience, then you pretty quickly get on some thin theological ice, I think.
Well, that's where, if you just back up for a second, I mean, this is a whole nother podcast, but this is why I don't, I think it's very rich when people always say, hey, if you're a Christian or if you're a religious person, you're making extraordinary claims and the burden of proof is on you. No, if you're a religious person, you're part of the vast majority of the globe, not only now, but for the entirety of the human race. So how on earth would that mean the burden of proof is on me? If you're a non-religious person, whether you define yourself as an atheist or just skeptics of various stripes, I'm getting really tired, Nathan, though, of the whole atheism is a really complex word and encompasses a spectrum. You know what? I'll just say fine, but I don't buy that one bit. But okay, let's say you say that. If that's you, you're part of it. You're a tiny, tiny, tiny little minority. Yes, it's true. You occupy some of the culturally elite sectors in the West, but you're still minuscule. That doesn't mean it's, that your position is necessarily true. No, but it does mean your categorical principle dismissal of it is ridiculous.
Well, but it's also
Absolutely ridiculous.
it's also it is the logical manifestation, I think, in the outworking of a culture that celebrates novelty and somebody who's willing to do something different. So
Absolutely, yes.
uh,
I mean, the modern world
Steve Irwin got
with
famous
novelty.
by letting venomous snakes lick his face, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's edgy. It's dangerous. He's the only one doing it. Well, that's so
Mhm.
cool. Like that's how you become a star. And so atheism does, sad to say, sociologically have its foundation in I'm going to be the one who does something different than everybody else, and that's gives me a sense of anyway. I better stop
So,
there.
we're gonna wrap it up here because we've I know we've given you listeners a lot to think about. This is a fun episode in the sense that Nathan and I are not entirely on the same page on this one, which I think is great. We try to give you a good example of how to
Pray for
clash
Cameron.
sensibly. Yes, pray for Nathan. Yeah, pray for him.
Yeah.
But we do appreciate you tagging along with us here. We would, and of course, I haven't read it yet, but I think it sounds like a lot more of us should be reading Ross Douthat's Belief, and then we can have an even more in-depth conversation on that book. But you've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and belief systems and whether spiritual but not religious is even a viable option and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.